All right. Welcome to Becky Live. think we're on like number 5 or number 6 of this. And today our topic is going to be around learning. I am Becky Andree, CEO of Vertical Leadership Consulting. And VLC specializes in a couple of things. My son likes to tell people my mom trains leaders' brains, and that's really what I do. I actually train anybody's brain to think more complexly, and I challenge us to connect more as humans, human to human. So that's really kind of our niche and our focus of learning together and activating our own awareness and developing our complexity of thinking that's very needed for the world. So I'm happy to have you here today, and we're going to explore learning. And I am going to take us through why we should care. Why do we even need to think about learning? I'm going to kind of walk us through what I've seen as our learning experience. And then I'm going to leave us with a few resources and a few suggestions of what we can do to be better learners. All right, so that's our journey for today. So, some people, so this comes from the World Economic Forum. I'm not going to go into whether or not, they are the appropriate resources or authorities to be telling us what we need or do not need. There are some people that, really are not fans of the World Economic Forum. And I just want to acknowledge that. But I do think they're understanding a phenomenon that we're kind of facing a crisis right now, where things are changing so rapidly that we actually need to be learning, unlearning, relearning kind of on a continual basis. And our learning experiences, which I'll get into a little bit, haven't really prepared us for that. And so the World Economic Forum is saying our reskilling needs that 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025, which is kind of a scary topic, considering that we just aren't good at learning and we always don't have the proper learning resources and support to reskill. And the World Economic Forum is also kind of, they've been doing this top 10 skills for, I don't know, probably the past 10 years. But they always look at the top 10 skills needed for 2025. Is this one in their Future of Jobs report from 2020? And you can see analytical thinking, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking, et cetera. And when I'm talking with CEOs or other high-level executives or leaders, I mean, they're quite concerned about people being able to adapt and be able to learn and be able to even understand and develop awareness and kind of, there's just a lot of nuances to it. They understand how fast things are changing, and they're not seeing the workforce respond as quickly as they need to. And that really doesn't matter any given level. I mean, it can be someone working on the shop floor that maybe has just been running a piece of machinery, for the past 20 years, and machinery is moving more into AI, predictive, I'm not doing the work anymore. A robot is doing it. So my job has shifted and changed, but that requires different skills and different ways of interacting. And if you've had 20 years of just running a machine and not experiencing that change, can be quite disorienting. So there's a lot here that suggests that learning is really a critical element. And in fact, it's number 2. And I would suggest that you can't do any of these things without some aspect of learning. And so I want you to keep that kind of in the back of your mind as we're going through this other aspects of, kind of some of these relationships or the impacts on these types of things. So I want to start with kind of that as humans, we are built for learning. And so interestingly enough, there was a research study done on how do you learn to walk and why do you learn to walk? And what they found is that in 1 hour, the average toddler, whether they're walking or crawling, takes 2,368 steps. They travel 701 meters, and they fell 17 times. So they fell whether they were crawling or walking. And you translate that into half of a toddler's typical waking day. They're taking 14,000 steps. They're walking 46 football fields, and they're falling 100 times. And if you've been around, I mean, I have a nephew who's 2 right now. Sometimes I'm so exhausted after a couple of hours with him. I'm like, what has happened? And then I remember, oh yes, he's like, traveled several football fields, and I have traveled it with him. But what's really fascinating is, when we're younger, we kind of have somewhat of this internal motivation, and we just kind of continue to learn. We're kind of a sponge and picking everything up. And if we look at kind of the chemical thing that happens in our brain, it actually activates the dopamine opioid cycle. So we're actually getting a hit of pleasure every single time we're working on learning something. So even if there's some pain, and there's pain in learning to walk, there's pain in learning to crawl, we're still kind of getting that hit that keeps us going back. All right. And we keep looking to learn. And if we kind of think about, even children before they go to school, there's just so much joy in the learning of, discovering rain for the first time and what it feels like to be in the rain and to get wet. What it feels like to stomp in a puddle. And there's always a lot of questions, where does the rain come from? And why does it rain? And what are clouds, and why are they different shapes? And if you've been around young children, you remember that endless and somewhat tiring list of questions that they have. It's because they're discovering the world. They're still in relationship with the world. They haven't become separate and distinct. And so there's still this joy. And then, of course, that little chemical hit is happening every time, right? That they're getting increased pleasure every time they're learning something, which is why they're always asking questions. And then you go into school, and, early in school, we still kind of get to experiment, and we still get to try things out and make some mistakes and learn from our mistakes, and everything still feels relatively safe. And if you were lucky enough as a child to kind of be in a Walden or a Montessori learning environment, that continued with you through your school. But if you were like most of us, we went to a public school that's based on a Cartesian view of learning, which is knowledge is a substance and pedagogy is knowledge transfer. So I, as the expert, know something and I tell you something. And this really comes from, if you've listened to me talk before, I talk about worldviews. The dominant worldview or the colonial worldview that most of us are embedded in, learning is fragmented, it's separate, it's distinct. You learn about chemistry, you learn about physics, you learn about words, letters, stories, but it isn't, we don't learn about how those things are in relationship to each other. And thinking is very dualistic. It's yes or no, black or white. We're very oftentimes detached even from the learning. Someone's telling us what we need to learn, and then we need to memorize it. And then, there's an external authority. Someone is telling us what's important to know. And when we contrast that to kind of an indigenous worldview, or what I might call a relational worldview, authority comes from inside of us. Learning is holistic. There's nature is instructive. We learn from that. There's a sense of responsibility. We don't get into the dualistic thinking. Everything is in relationship with it. And just to provide an example that Tyson Yunkaporta talks about in his book, Sand Talk, is deep thinking. We learn that there are these different types of minds, and these different types of minds are all in relationship with each other. And you can see it is conceptualized by even the visual, the aesthetic, all right? And you can see how all of those elements on the left-hand side go in to make up the one element, all right? So visually, we're seeing relationships, and then as we're doing the thinking, we're seeing relationships. So it's a very different way of learning. Everything is learning, all right? And so again, everything is activating that dopamine opioid cycle, whereas in a colonial worldview, we're limiting that, and we're actually taking it away most of the time. And I just want you to kind of see the impact of human potential. So in this dominant worldview, the capacity for humans to improve themselves through studying, training, or practice, which are all external, right, to reach the limit of their ability to develop aptitudes and skills. And then versus an indigenous worldview, we have the power to change our own perspective by embracing what's within ourselves, knowing we can face challenges with love, light, faith, and positivity. You have the power and you have the knowledge, right? So very different ways of thinking about learning. But mostly what we see in the business world, very little relationship, very little connection, sometimes even little connection to the job. But we, compartmentalize everything. You have to have this skill, you have to have this ability, you have to have this competence, and all of our learning is organized around this. And again, it's perpetuating this thing of you don't need to know, we're going to tell you what you need to know. And it was interesting. Yesterday, I was having a discussion with my colleague, Tom Bohink, and I was mentioning this to him, that we've outsourced our knowing to other people. And he was saying, oh my gosh, Becky, this really explains a lot of what we see happening in our society, where people aren't digging beyond what they're told is a fact. And it may not even be a complete fact. And I said, yes, this is what I mean about this impact of us not having a relationship with learning and not having it come from inside ourselves. In addition, we live in this fast world pace. Now, COVID-19 gave us a chance to take a pause and kind of reflect on some things. And so some things have shifted. A lot of families experienced how nice it was to actually be home for dinner every night, to not be having their kids in a million different activities that they're driving to. And so you see some families making conscious choices now to kind of slow things down. In the business world, we were kind of forced to slow some things down. Supply chains were disrupted. It wasn't safe to get together, whatever. There might have been political or government regulations put on us. But the pace, has kind of begun to accelerate again. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. And so what that means is that we tend to just do our learning at the surface level. We don't dig deep. And I think that is one thing that I am a little bit concerned about with the generations coming in. One, there's so much learning at their fingertips, and learning is kind of embedded in everything they do. And so for that part, I'm really appreciative. I mean, sometimes I'm just shocked at how much my son knows. He will say something to me and I'll be like, how did you know that? And he'll say, oh, I was watching this YouTuber. And so a lot of the things that we see as entertainment, there's a lot of deep learning in there. Or there's learning. I shouldn't say there's deep learning. Where I get concerned is, are we having them put that together in deeper ways to deepen their understanding, to deepen what that means in relationship for themselves with others in the world. So I see some really good things, but I see some things that potentially could, get us into trouble in 20 to 30 years. And so what I see is kind of some learning habits that have creeped in. We've heard about growth versus fixed mindset. Newsflash, you can't just train someone to have a growth mindset. In fact, everybody has a growth mindset. But what ends up happening is if we've had bad learning experiences, as they've studied the brain's connectome, they've found that emotions are actually entangled into all of these memories and ways of knowing. And so if we experience someone who is kind of fixed or closed to learning, oftentimes it's because there are some deeply hurtful emotions that have been entangled in those learning experiences. And so they don't actually need to learn how to have a growth mindset. They actually need to begin to have a series of positive experiences of that learning. They need to activate that dopamine opioid cycle again. They need to see learning as that hit. All right. I see a lot of memorization, a lot of collecting of facts, but really no relationship with them. So it's interesting. Like sometimes I will look at people and I'm like, wow, they just know a lot of things. But then they're not able to kind of take those things and see the relationship, or sometimes they have a harder time adding something that maybe is kind of far away from what they know and integrating it into what they know. So, there are some limitations there. As I said, one of my biggest concerns is that we have outsourced knowing to others, whether that's to metrics, to consultants, to schools. We expect that these other people are going to tell us exactly what we need to do. So, we don't take responsibility. We just wait for someone. It was one of the things that I struggled with when I was in corporate America is how do you get people to take agency? for identifying what they need to know and then going out and learning it and knowing it. And then the other thing is that we just go surface level. We just do the quick. And it's not like we have to go out and read 100 books. I mean, sometimes with my coaching clients, I am just recommending a Harvard Business Review article, but then I'm having them go deeper in the application and reflection. And that's the part that I oftentimes think we miss out on. And learning professionals are always, in the classroom talking about, you need to apply this. It can't stop in the classroom. You need to reflect. And, our learners are oftentimes resistant to that. All right. One, I don't think they've had the experience, or two, they might have had an experience where, when I did that, it didn't create either positive feelings or positive outcomes. And so there's just a lot of these kind of bad learning habits that go on. And then on top of it, you have a lot of bad learning that is out there, where it's just a one-way exchange, just a PowerPoint. Or not even really teaching, just dumping information. All right. And so then we also end up with, because we've got these worldviews, we've got all these different ways that we experience learning. And so we end up with these entrenched mindsets or beliefs. And so it's kind of like you have one foot on the gas pedal. You want to change, you want your experience to be different, but the other foot is equally applied to the brake. And it's oftentimes unconscious. We're not aware of it. And so kind of that growth or fixed mindset, right? I want to learn. I acknowledge that I need to be more open, and yet unconsciously my brain doesn't want me to go there. It's got one foot on the brake. And so if any of you have studied with Dr. Robert Keegan or used the immunity to change process, that can help surface those mindsets or beliefs so that people can begin to do something with it. But oftentimes these things are prohibiting learning as well, or prohibiting kind of a different experience in the world for us. And so what I see is a lot of leaders that think that the answers have to come from themselves. And some of that is complexity of thinking, and so they're looking at all these things, scratching their head, trying to figure it out, when really what needs to be happening is they need to understand my piece of the puzzle and how my piece of the puzzle intersects and connects and collides with other people's pieces of the puzzle. But school doesn't always develop that capacity. I mean, we see, a lot of do a group project, but this isn't what ends up happening. All right. They all go and create a puzzle piece, and some people don't create the puzzle piece. And so some people have to do 3 or 4. And then there's no awareness or thought of how it connects or collides. It's just kind of, mushed together in a big ball. So we aren't even having those experiences of developing that skill set. And so in today's complex world and kind of the way things are changing, we need everybody engaging, right? Bringing their unique ways of engaging. But we also have to understand that through that work, it's also coming back to us and changing us, and we're learning through the work, and then we're learning through each other. So sometimes I do learning through the curriculum of work. So I might work with an executive leadership team to understand some dysfunction that's going on by doing strategic planning together, working together as a team, and then stopping when we're falling into dysfunction and having a conversation about that. If a leadership team is having a tough time navigating tension and kind of sitting in the fire, I might have us explore a tension that we're already deeply embedded in, so that we can have this experience collectively and together of how we can sit in the fire and kind of manage this tension. So one thing that I really love, you may have read Ed Hess's book, Hyperlearning: How to Adapt to the Speed of Change. One thing I really appreciate about Ed is he puts his knowledge out there in a very humble and expansive and generous way. So you really only have to search Ed Hess and you're going to see all sorts of videos, articles, however you learn best. There's a different way of thinking about it. But what I love, it's kind of, I would say, the next version of what Peter Senge put together with the 5th discipline. But it's understanding we have a new way of being, that we have to journey to our best self, that we haven't been living in a way and haven't been growing up in a way that really has us have mastery of self. And what I love about Ed's model is he talks about a quiet ego, a quiet mind, a quiet body. And if you think about kind of the volatility that we see, or how easily people get triggered, or the really reactive emotions, that really is indication of a society that isn't good about having a quiet ego, a quiet mind, and a quiet body. All right. He also talks about inner peace, making sure that you're stable. And then he goes into building hyper learning mindset and then hyper learning behaviors. And what I love about it is he really focuses on meaningful relationships. So a lot of the things that I do we're learning together. All right. So everything is, again, I try to focus on that relationship rather than that Cartesian view. And I did plenty of Cartesian learning in my day, but I have found that kind of designing things that are more relational are having a bigger impact. He talks about humanizing the workplace. And then he talks about this recognition of otherness, building caring, trusting teams. If you've been following me, high quality connections is a big part of my research and what I do. And he talks about creating those high quality, making meaning conversations, talks about high collective intelligence, which is intelligence beyond ourselves. It's that collective, and how do we tap into it, kind of thinking about those puzzle pieces. How do we know our puzzle piece, and how do we intersect it with others? And then the collective flow of being in that meaningful work and contributing to the world. So I love this because it looks at the individual, but it also looks at the system as well of how do we do this and what are the aspects at play. And if you haven't read his book, I would highly recommend it. It really was a delightful read. I think chapter 2 took me quite a long time because I really did engage with it the way he recommended it. He breaks down all of the different ways that individuals have thought about kind of this mastery of self and how they've conceptualized it. And it was a really interesting activity to kind of see what was similar, different, and how they all had nuances of explaining it. Another book that I really have appreciated is Deep Learning in a Disorienting World. And I believe the author is John Wiergen. I think it's Wiergen. But this kind of explains a lot of aspects that go into learning and different ways of learning. And what I love is he talks about that learning has a disorienting dilemma. All right. So there's something that sparks it. And then there's kind of this critical reflection or mindful learning. But I also love that he's starting to bring in what we're just starting to understand is the aesthetic experience, which is really kind of the arts and how the arts can inspire these or create these disorienting dilemmas. And it's been really fascinating for me to lean into this. I am very, how would I say it? When I go and watch ballet, for the next 3 days, I am my most creative self. All right. So there is something about how I engage with dance, and I'm not doing the dance, I'm observing the dance, but there's some sort of aesthetic experience. I can feel it in my body. I couldn't necessarily describe it with my brain or cognitively what's happening, but I know it's going to happen. And so if I'm feeling stuck, or if I'm feeling like I haven't been creative, or I'm feeling a little bit sluggish, I typically will go out and look and see when is the next ballet coming. And then I block off on my schedule a good 3 days because I know that I'm going to be very innovative and creative. Now, I don't know how to explain why that happens. The things that I'm creating are very cognitive. They're not dances. But there is just this interesting relationship I have with this aesthetic experience. Now, similar things will happen when I read a poem. Like this morning, if you saw my LinkedIn post, was really got a new poetry book by David White, and was just really drawn to read the poem called Still Possible. And it was amazing as I was reading through this poem, the learning that was coming through, the reflection that I could think about of the moments that had happened in my life and where I am today. And so, this poem created some disorienting dilemmas for me. It invited me in to do some mindful learning. There was analytical learning going on as I was reflecting. I was assimilating learning from, how David was describing these experiences in his poem. There was transformative learning for me of it transformed how I saw the world and somewhat intuitive. All right. Now, the part that was missing was the discourse with others in the social learning field, which is oftentimes why I'm sharing things on LinkedIn, because I'm really interested in that discourse with others. When I share this, what do they think? What are they learning? How does that impact the way in which I learn? So I really like his way of conceptualizing all of these various elements, this relationship, right? Like it is much more than just learning objectives and then designing learning around those learning objectives. It's all of these different pieces, and how do we bring it in and create experiences for people? So I had all sorts of models I was going to show you, and then I thought, oh, Becky, this is ridiculous. You can't show them all these models. So maybe sometime I'll do another session where I geek out and just show you all the models. But just to make it simple, like we really have to focus on the relationship of learning, all right? And we have to have a relationship with keeping learning, all right? And this is kind of what I do with my clients of for me, it's always about how do I develop their internal awareness? How do I get them deciding what road they're going to go on and how fast they're going to go and who they're going to let on that road with them? And how is that road going to intersect with other roads? All right. So again, I'm always thinking about the relationship. But the first thing is setting intention or setting a learning goal, aware of this is something I want to be knowing or something I need to learn or some way in which I need to become a new way. Then I focus on getting them to engage. So some sort of relationship with the learning, whether it's watching a video, writing down what they know, reading a Harvard Business Review article, having a conversation with their partner or a brother or a sister. And then I move them into application. And depending on their skill level, do I need them to be aware of this skill? So do I need to have them observing things? Do I need to have them practicing the skill where they're actually doing active things? Or do they already have this skill and they need to develop mastery and that they're seeing how it connects with other things, unintended consequences, relationships? And so I kind of think about that application. Where are they at? What do they need? And then reflection is the key. So oftentimes we do not spend time in reflection, but this is how we deepen our knowing. And not only that, well, it does many things, but one, it tells the brain, this is important. All right. So I better file it away, because sometimes the brain just throws shit in a file drawer. All right. When we do reflection, it says, oh, I can't just throw this into the file drawer. This needs to have a folder so that Becky can find it again easily. The second thing it does with reflection is it's always helping develop our complexity of thinking, that we can see things in new and different ways. The next learning occurs, all right? The next learning opportunity actually comes from that reflection of what is that new thing. And this is where Ed Hess's work in his model is really quite remarkable, is that it's always that next thing, all right? And my 4 steps have really been inspired by Dr. Theo Dawson and her work around virtuous cycles of learning. Hers tend to be much more focused on just skill. Mine is expanded out a little bit. It might be a skill, it might be emotions, it might be systems or relationships, but I'm deeply inspired by this woman's work, who I do think is brilliant. And we are a very generous soul as well. So You can find her YouTube channels, and she writes on Medium a lot and has some deep knowing. And I really enjoy engaging in relationship with the thoughts and ideas that she shares. So that's a little bit about how I'm thinking about learning right now. I hope it sparked some things for you, and I hope making it simple has kind of inspired you to maybe get into the habit of doing this either on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And I do want to let you know about some upcoming events. So next week on December 14th, I have a new offering where I'm giving you a chance to experience how we learn together. And next week's topic is around developing your people, where we're going to learn the 70-20-10 framework. So that's from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time. For the 2 hours, it is active learning. So you're engaged the whole time. So if you're signing up, make sure that you've got that 2 hours blocked off. In 2022, I'll be offering Becky Live and Learning Together on the third week of every month. So Becky Live will be on Thursdays at 11 a.m. and Learning Together will always be Tuesdays at 11 a.m. So my Becky Live will always be recorded and posted on YouTube, but the Learning Together is not recorded. That's really a live event where you need to be present and active, and we're learning together around a topic. So January 18th, our learning topic is going to be rebalancing society. So we have an imbalance going on right now between individuals, corporations, and government entities. And so individuals, again, have outsourced the power to corporations and to government, waiting to be told what to do. And what needs to happen is we need to reactivate personal agency and communities and collective people coming together to take action on things and to make movement instead of just waiting for businesses or government entities to make decisions. We need to be making the decisions, and we need to be driving the action and telling them what they need to be doing. So on January 18th, we're going to spend some time focusing on that together. And then in February, our Learning Together topic will be accountability. It's a tricky world. So I'm really happy to be here with you today. If you're interested in having a deeper conversation with me about learning, this is kind of how you get in touch with me. And I hope you enjoyed talking a little bit about learning.